So for example, uh, when we try to understand about the Visual Studio Code from the context of JSON files, which I am showing you over here, whenever we are working on the migration part, especially, so whenever we are working on the old application, let's say there was old mainframe application we are using for a very long time. I'll give you an example from the insurance applications. For example, insurance application, assume that you are using old application or you're using one of the application called Magisk or something, for example, right? So you're using for a long time. Now, what organizations do? Organizations wants to migrate from old legacy systems to the new application.
Yes, sir.
That's where generally which they wants to do it. So when they are migrating from old legacy applications to the new application, data migration has to be taken place. So when we are going to migrate the data, there are different file formats which we have to understand. Because if you're taking old mainframe application, the file formats might be something old. But when it comes to the new applications nowadays, most of the file formats either will be in XML format or it can be JSON or any other formats. So one of the example which I have taken is a JSON format, because whenever you want to make any kind of changes in the files when you are doing, because this is where generally you have to make some configurations, because when you are working on the administration side, two things you need to do. One is about integration and second is configuration. Integration means as in when you are doing from Jira to GitHub, or you may be integrating from Jira with external servers. This is where something which normally we do it. But whereas when it comes to the configurations point of view, configurations are majorly used when you want to make any kind of changes in the business goals. For example, your organization have lined up with some business rules. So whatever the configuration of the application you want to make, you make some subsequent configurations in the existing features and functionalities which the new application you are using. In this regard, as far as the data migration process itself is concerned, we need to create some staging database, and what are the data transformations we want to do to configure the application, any application, followed by what are the different modules or the features you are going to install in that, right? So if you want to do that, it's always important for us to create a staging database. Whenever we are creating a staging database, always it is important for us to create the staging infrastructure for the data migration projects, right? So that the whole file format data has to be transformed using this ETL, different ETL tools and all, wherein we have to extract the data. We have to clean the data, transform it, and load it to the new database. In this part, generally configuration is in this configuration, whatever the JSON files we are going to use, especially when you want to run any kind of code and all. So these JSON files are something used. So in this regard, so we have to set up the JSON files, because these are all the file formats we are using. At the same time, whatever the kind of code you want to write from the user perspective. For example, if you want to build some caches, okay? For example, if you want to build any kind of caches or something of that sort. Or else, for example, if you want to build any kind of JSON application formats we want to use. Or else, for example, if you want to create any kind of workbench, right? So, for example, if you want to create any kind of color themes for the workbench, whatever that we are going to use. For all these purposes, whatever the required configurations we want to update, whatever the required workbench configurations we want to be updated, especially whenever we are working on the application data, because application data is what something which we have to be used in this. At the same time, make sure whatever the cookies are we going to incorporate for the existing code, what we are developing is something essentially required, because whenever we are connecting to the code, especially there are two different things we need to know, because either it can be a JSON format or an XML format. Normally there are different integrations we do, because if you want to understand about the scripting part, first of all, we need to understand the API part as well, because application programming interfaces, either it can be SOAP API or it can be RESTful API, right? So different APIs are being used, so that if you want to build any kind of communication between two applications, generally these APIs are being used here. So when you are building an API, when you are creating an API creation, you are working for two different applications. If you want to connect these two applications and all, whatever the API we are writing, for that it is always important for us to have some program or a scripting is what something which you need to write. This is where generally the scripting comes into picture. Either it can be of Java scripting or a Groovy scripting and all. This is where generally scripting comes into picture, so that whenever there is any usage, whenever there are any configurations we want to make with the existing JSON files or something of that sort, this is something which normally we use. Means if you want to write any kind of configurations, or if you want to make any kind of integrations with any other external servers, anything of that sort, this is what something the Visual Studio Code will be using, especially for settings of JSON, etc. Now, when it comes to the Eclipse part, because when it comes to the Eclipse part, so whatever the lines of code you want to write, for example, if you want to write any kind of code, especially, right? So using basic Java programming code you want to write, right? For example, you want to write a first Java program, right? So for example, I've just taken an example for Raju, right? So this is what something which as a code I have taken, wherein if you want to implement any kind of basic programming code and all everything. So there are different classes, instances, objects has to be used in the programming. So these classes, objects, instances are something which is useful for us whenever you are going to write any kind of code for any of the application, because there are different classes will be used when you are writing the code. There are different instances will be used here, and whatever the interfaces we want to be implemented, we have to use the implementation of source code also there. So always important when we are writing down any kind of Eclipse, or if there is any application we wants to applicate, whenever we wants to use any applications and all, here you can see different Java compilers or data transfers can be used. For example, yeah, right. So you can see that class file. This is a class file, especially for an application I have taken, because here I have taken a project called cloud-based point of sale system. In this cloud-based point of sale system, there are different libraries which I have taken, especially from the Java point of view. I have taken. In this Java point of view, whenever I have taken an object for Java data transfer is what something which I have taken, wherein if I want to open in this on JDK files, etc. So one of the class file which I have used is called clipboard.class. Okay, there are, first of all, when you are writing down the code, when you want to import any kind of Java files, because data import is what something we have to use. So if you want to write any kind of code, especially a class file, if you want to write down here, first of all, this is a code which was taken, right? So which was taken already, right? So because this is an online code which is available, right? So there are there are a lot of class files, even for security purpose, even for Java scripting purpose also we have. That I'll explain that later, because Java x.script files are there, that I'll explain it later. So before you are going for the scripting part, it's always important for us to import the Java libraries, because either basic Java IO streams will be there, or else if you want to create any kind of arrays, or if you want to create any kind of objects, or any kind of exceptions you want to create for your Java files. So first of all, we need to write down the code for the import. This is the first thing which we need to do. At the same time, for example, if you want to import any kind of code, etc. So this is a code we are using for the data transfer purpose, because that's what generally we have taken. If you want to take any kind of data transfer and all. So first of all, we need to import a code wherein we have to update the data transfer over here is what something which we need to do it. Next, when you want to write down the class files, wherein by implementing the operators, what are the operators are we going to use? Make sure you need to create the class files based on the public class, because execution of the code what we are maintaining, or whatever the code execution we wants to do over here, you can see whatever the declaration statements we are going to write, or the kind of problems, anything were error here, right? So if there are any errors were identified, so those errors we can see. At the same time, if there is any kind of declaration you want to make, especially if you want to declare this public class, okay, this public class, or else if you want to mention the string name, right? For example, string name you are going to mention, especially on the alphabetical this thing, right? So if you want to make any kind of string name, or if you want to edit any kind of string names, or if you want to update any kind of string names over here. So yeah, so if you want to update any kind of string names over here, or else if you want to update any kind of integers, right? So integers, for example, you want to maintain, or you want to mention about what I can say, you want to mention about the contact number. Okay, so contact number where you have to use some integers, etc. Right? So different alphabets can be used. At the same time, numbers can also be used, or else some decimal, right? For example, 23.56. Okay, decimal numbers will be used. So that information we have to be updated. Means what type of data or what kind of classes are we using? Either it can be an integer or it can be a class file we are implementing. So that class implemented class files wherein to write whatever the private classes or the public classes. That public class or a private class is what something which we have to be updated in the Eclipse files. This is how generally, of course, this has a downloadable code. There is a lot of code which doesn't require to write all that. Okay, sample code if you are writing is more than sufficient. You don't need to create all the codes, etc. But when it comes to the scripting part itself is concerned, for to write the scripting, whatever the required scripting you want to maintain, or if you want to create any kind of scripting, or if you want to create any kind of security. For example, if you want to create any kind of security files, or if, for example, if there is any kind of cascading style sheets you want to use, right? So for the security purpose, or else if you want to create any kind of Java scripting relating to compilation part. For example, if you want to compile any kind of classes and all everything, right? So compatible class files if you want to use. For that purpose, generally this Eclipse is being used. So Eclipse is one of an IDE, as I stated, which is majorly useful for us to write whatever the required code. If you want to execute any kind of Java code or something, of course, majorly we use Java code. So basic of Java is always important for you to learn before you are going to the scripting, because either we may be going for Java scripting or maybe in future we are going for Groovy scripting. It's always important for you to learn the basics of Java scripting, Java programming is essentially required, because what is class, what is instance, what is meant by an object, what is meant by package, right? So how you are updating the packages in the Java file, right? So what are the different file formats are we going to use? This is what something which basically you need to know, because the basics of Java programming, at least if you able in a position to write a hello world program, at least to start with, I'm saying, okay, or else it may be any other addition of two numbers or any other math calculations we are doing, or if they want to use any kind of algorithms to be implemented, that is next level, right? So that is optional anyway, but the
Okay.
basic learning of Java is always important if you want to learn Java scripting or something, because scripting we are creating for generation of two different applications we are working on. So it's always better if you have some knowledge over the script in Java programming. It's always important. To run that, it's always we need to know about the class statements. We must be knowing about objects interfaces, whatever the IO streams do we have. So that knowledge is required. That's what something which I'm going to explain from tomorrow onwards. Right. So this is what something majorly in Eclipse IDE, which normally we use when we wants to work on any kind of Java files or something, is all about. This is